So one of the things that we might be interested in terms of working with the DOM, would be to add event listeners. So what we can end up doing here is if we end up grabbing these elements, so we'll go over here and let's specify document query selector, and we'll just say div. We've just got one div on this page. And let's just call this div. Let's make sure that we found it. And what we'll end up doing here is when we end up running this, we'll see that we have our div. And one of the things we could end up doing is we could add an event listener to it. So we could say div addEventListener, and we could specify that it's going to be the click event. And we could go over here and we can get information about the element that got clicked on. So we could console.log ev.target. So if we go over here, add event, not even, and if we go over here, we could see that we could click on blue, we could end up clicking on red, and we could also, let's just give ourselves a little padding around here so we could see our div as well. And we'll say background color, let's make it orange. So, and let's actually give ourselves some padding. So if we ended up clicking over here, we would see that we were on our div. Here we could see we're on red. Here we could see we're on blue. And this becomes pretty useful because one of the things that you could end up doing here is you could isolate this and go over here and specify that if ev.target tag name, and that's an uppercase tag name, and these always come in uppercase. We could say we're only interested in when you click on a paragraph tag. And we'll go over here and we'll say console.log ev.target, and let's do inner HTML, which would just give us either hello world 2 or hello world. But if we click up here, we're not going to see anything because we're not clicking on the paragraph tags. So this gives us a way to have a bigger area and to add one event handler on it and to basically determine if what we're clicking on is what we think we're clicking on. Another thing we could also do here is we could go over here and we could do a query selector. And let's go over here and say that this is going to be a p tag, and let's make it first p, and we'll go over here and we'll say first p, and let's take this out and let's say console.log ev.target.inner, or actually just do ev.target. So now when we click on this, we'll see that this is only gonna, it's not gonna happen with the second one, but with this one we're gonna end up seeing hello world. So one of the things that happens with event handlers is they get propagated upward, meaning that if there's also an event handler on this div, maybe we would want to handle that as well. And if we went over here and we said div equals document query selector div, maybe we'd want to have this same logic. So we've got our div, we've got our first p, and so let's just query selector. So one of the things that I might do here is that if I click anywhere here, I'll see that I'm either clicking on the div or I'm clicking on this. But the thing that's interesting about this, let me clear this out. If I click over here, I'll see that I end up getting both of them, right? And to see which is which, one of the things that I could show you is that it starts, we really bubble up. We start with the inner, it doesn't matter what the order is here, but we start with the inner event handler. And if I wanted to, I could go over here and specify EV, and we could specify that we want to stop the propagation. So we could say, with the event, no longer propagate upwards. And the way that that's going to change is that this will still happen, and this will still happen. And let's actually, just so we can see this, we'll say p-click, and we'll go over here and we'll say div-click, because that's where we put this on. And if I end up clicking on this first one, I'll just see that it's a paragraph click because I stopped the propagation. If I don't stop the propagation, we bubble up from here, and we go up, and we end up getting the p-click, and we also get the div-click. So stop propagation will say, hey, look, if you want to, and you are going to bubble up, you could end up stopping bubbling up. Another thing you could also do here is that, let's say that we had a form here. And the natural thing for a form is if we put a button here and we were to go over here and we were to put an input here, give it a name, foo. The natural thing to happen with a form is that if I was over here, and again, I've got a click handler inside of my div, and I go and do this, you'll see that I'm actually reloading the page. I'm going over here and I'm reloading the page because that's what the default behavior is. But if I went over here and I said, hey, div, and these are two totally separate things, I could say, by the way, not stop propagation, because that's not really what I'm trying to stop here, but I could say prevent default, meaning that we know we ended up clicking, whatever we ended up doing here, if we end up clicking on the form, whatever the default behavior is, which would be to actually submit this. And let's get this out of here by going over here. So if you have something that's in a form and the default behavior is to submit the form, now when I click on it, I can end up preventing that behavior by putting this in here. Again, if I take this out, I'll see that if I type in here, it's going to end up giving me behavior that I might not want. I might not want to submit that form. So two things here. The idea of adding event handlers, the idea of getting this event, being able to evaluate the target, and being able to take that event object and modify what the behavior is, either by preventing the browser's default behavior or stopping the propagation from propagating up.